President Trump went on television in the United States on Sunday with a pretty direct claim that, or declaration, probably is a better way to put it, that he is wanting to seek an immediate ceasefire with the Russia-Ukraine war, that he wants to bring it to an end, and that he is just looking for the best ways that he can to end the war, end the suffering and the bloodshed and the loss of territory for the Ukraine side, and finally get onto some kind of a positive trajectory that even has the outlook for hope of a future for Ukraine. In that environment, we have the current administration now barely 5 weeks left in its administration after 3 years of foolishly supporting a war that never had a chance. They seem to want to ramp this situation up one more level, and another ATACMS missile strike, U.S. long-range missiles that have to be in part guided and put on target by U.S. military personnel has launched into Russia and hit in the Bryansk region there. And this is just going to cause a potential real escalation before Trump can get in. To try and help us make some kind of sense out of what's going on, we have back on the show Patrick Henningsen, who is a journalist and host of TNT Radio Live and his own website there, SundayWire.com. Patrick, welcome back to the show, first of all.
It's great to be back with you, Daniel. Yeah, not with TNT anymore, but formerly TNT. But yeah.
Oh, sorry about that. Formerly.
It's okay.
My apologies. SundayWire.com, though. I hope. Is there anything else that we need to add in there about your current?
21stCenturyWire.com is the mothership for our independent media platform, but you can find that on my Twitter feed and links on my bio.
Very good. Yeah, and we'll try and throw that in the description phase as well for all of those who might want to watch it. Apologize for missing that at the beginning, but holy cow. What let's just, start right there. What in the world is going on with the Biden administration? Because I can tell you authoritatively from a military perspective, there is zero possibility of improving the situation for Ukraine. There is no possibility of bettering the negotiating position for Zelensky and Trump, as some have claimed. So then the question is, what the hell?
Well, you hit the nail on the head right there, Daniel. This is a tactical move. It's not strategic. In the broad sense, the United States, this position, the whole Ukraine project is on a kind of arc of failure. And the problem is, and what's dangerous is if you have a U.S. administration doing short-term tactical moves that have a lot of political motivation behind them in terms of U.S. domestic policy or how the battle of how foreign policy is going to be shaped in the next administration. This is very dangerous. And, the United States does often have continuity from administration to administration with foreign policy, even if they're Democrat, Republican, or whatever. But there's always this kind of continuity of U.S. Long-term interests. What you don't want to do is allow short-term political concerns to shape your foreign policy and get you into a situation or a new problem that the next administration will have to repair. But this does happen. This has happened in the Middle East. This has happened with the Clinton administration, arguably as well. So, this is a problem. So this is absolute blatant sabotage by a lame duck Biden administration or a deep state that is directing this or trying to set the table for, some kind of an unwinnable negotiation environment come January. That's what it appears. It's kind of blatant at this point, actually, because this isn't the first thing that we've seen in the last month of the same type. And it's going to fail because what it's doing is giving Russia a much stronger hand globally to make its case that the United States and Kiev are only interested in escalation. And the longer this goes on, all the goodwill that NATO has accumulated for Ukraine and the little green action figure in Kiev, it's whittling away now. And with every successive move, weaker and weaker. And that's very, very important. Now, Russia can make a really great case to the world, and that matters because this is an international event and negotiations, all the spotlight will be on it. And if it doesn't happen, the longer it doesn't happen, the stronger Russia their position becomes on the ground as well, by the way, like militarily in terms of territory that it's going to control. And it will say we have the right to control because we need to extend a buffer zone. And how can you argue this now that the United States full-throated support of Israel taking over the Golan Heights as a buffer zone for its security concerns. So the U.S. and Washington are caught in a real conundrum here in terms of the credibility and the hypocrisy of the policies that they back and that they're executing.
Well, now, what do you think is the intent, anyway, as best you can piece together from the Biden administration to take this action? Because as Russian media today is pointing out, that it was confirmed that there were ATACMS missiles that were used against the Russian base, that there will be a response, and they actually said that there was going to be a response after the last round, which was round number 3 of the U.S. long-range ATACMS missiles. After Biden gave permission, Russia did respond after the first round and said with the Oreshnik missile, and said that there could be a lot more where this came from. Then we followed it up with another one after that. But one wonders if there was no response from the Russian side after the second one, because maybe they decided to eat this and said, all right, Trump's coming in, let's see if we can, not have this escalate so that we have a better chance to negotiate something that's in our interest on the backside of this. But now then with this, it's basically just going into the lair of a bear in his cave, shoving him and daring him to do something back by the Biden administration. So the question is, towards what end? Do they just want to force the bear to do something so that Trump doesn't have the possibility of seeking a negotiated settlement? Or what else could be behind the scenes here?
No, that's definitely one intention. It has to be that trying to push Russia to retaliate, and maybe retaliate in a bigger way, or retaliate closer to NATO's borders, as Jan Stoltenberg calls them. That's the intention. But Russia's been playing this game. They're trying to play checkers with a chess player. Because Russia's been playing this back and forth, and every single time they've almost held status quo. They know what the United States internal political machinations are, and the battle to dethrone Trump, to delegitimize Trump. But more broadly, it's not really about Trump. It's about delegitimizing this long-term commitment by successive U.S. administrations to expand NATO and to create the ultimate confrontation with Russia and bring war back to Europe, or at least some kind of a serious security crisis in Europe.
I keep hearing that, though, but I mean, help me make sense of that. Let's take morality out of it for a second, and let's say that whether it's NATO and the Biden administration or whatever conglomeration of folks are moving in this direction, where is there any advantage to creating an actual conflict between NATO and Ukraine? Does someone think that they can contain it, and that it will only be on the periphery of NATO and just keep a casus belli so that there exists in NATO, but it won't harm anybody? I mean, how does that make sense?
It is a gamble. It is a gamble on the part of the U.S. And we're saying U.S. Because in NATO and the UK, U.S. and UK lead NATO. So when we talk about NATO, we're talking about the United States and then Britain as their partner. We're not talking about Kiev. Kiev will do what they're enabled to do by the people who supply them with their weapons, their reconnaissance, their intelligence, their expertise, and the ability to actually fire these missiles. So we're really taking Ukraine out of the picture here. They're just used as a kind of a scapegoat or a front for NATO in this case. But it is a gamble. It is a gamble. They're gambling that Russia is going to have prudence and have restraint, and is going to wait until an opportune time to make some kind of a symbolic strategic statement with maybe another round of Oreshnik missiles hitting key Ukrainian military targets. It could go further, but if this spins into, because we don't know what provocations will come between now and January 20th, there could be more. This looks like escalation. So yeah, we're having this conversation about this incident, and this is a serious incident indeed. But things could even escalate further. So they're trying to they're definitely trying to provoke Russia to respond in a way that will justify some kind of an ultimate crisis in the West and NATO stance, saying, look, we told you about Putin. He's hitting NATO targets, or he's let's say something lands in Poland. I think we spoke about this before. How's that going to be interpreted by the body politic in Europe? Because that's what really matters on the front line. Are they going to be all in for Article 5 and let's go to nuclear war? No, Europe's not going to go that way. Some of the leaders might be talking tough right now, but when it comes down to the crunch, there could be a serious political crisis, and it would cause a real backlash against the United States and all the hawks in NATO. You're already seeing this reflected in the polls right across Europe. So I mean, this is a process that's already happening now, and you could view this, Daniel, as the United States pushing back against the Romanian elections, which they have been annulled because of some ridiculous excuse. But this is a Romania, key NATO partner in a strategic location for NATO's expansion, wants to have a peace negotiation with Ukraine. So then that Romania wants peace, Hungary wants peace, Slovakia wants peace. The further we go, the AFD in Germany want peace. They're challenging for
Turkey wants peace.
Turkey, all these countries. So the United States, Washington is pushing back against an inevitable wave of de-escalation over Ukraine, and you could look at it that way.
Well, and that's gosh, but the risk. Where is the benefit to have that kind of risk? Why can't this be, again, just keep morality out of it and what's right and wrong, but just in self-interest? It seems like it's reasonable to say, all right, you know what? We have tried everything in the world for nearly 3 years, and I mean everything. And all we see is the continued contraction of what's left of the Ukrainian state and the diminishing of their manpower, the wiping out of at least 2 generations of men that they will no longer have in the future. Why can't you say, all right, let's just close this out? Let's live to fight another day. And I don't know, we can look at some way to oppose Russia later on, but let's just end this one and get ourselves stronger and move on, as opposed to going down something that has demonstrably failed in catastrophic, spectacular methods so far, and try to keep it going. Help me understand that.
Well, a lot of this is indicative of the sort of malaise that you find historically in late stage empire, whereby the leading imperial power will try to wage some kind of a conquest, and it becomes a vanity project. This happened with Rome. This has happened with successive empires throughout history, the British Empire, and now the United States Empire. So this is one of the ultimate vanity projects, because so much political capital has been sunk into this. The whole legacies are resting on this idea that Russia gets what it wants or doesn't. Russia's the loser or Russia's the winner. If you watch programs, talk shows, they're constantly haranguing guests. Are you going to allow Putin to win? In this case, we can't do that.
I've been a hit like that on TV before.
We can't embolden Putin. That word, embolden. So this is the basis of it. So this is very indicative, I think, of a culture, a political culture that is quite dangerous, actually, because the weapons that we're talking about here, which you're showing on screen, I mean, these are very dangerous, and not to mention if they fall into the wrong hands, that's another conversation. There's more weapons and arms flooded in the international system right now than ever before in history. So that's another level.
And I want to keep going down this path that you just opened up there about the disconnection from reality about some of I hesitate to call them the foreign policy elite, because that implies that they're good, but the ones that are in charge up there. Here is Kurt Volker recently asked an honest question by a questioner about, why do you think now that both Russia and Ukraine has at least saying that they're willing to have a negotiated settlement? Watch this very curious answer.
Another thing that I think is incredibly important is just how weak Russia has become over the last couple of years. We see weakness in their economy with very high inflation, high interest rates, lack of access to finances for businesses and for travelers. We see weakness in their military. They are losing forces at an incredible rate and having a difficult time replacing them. Hence, they're bringing in North Koreans, they're bringing in Iranian drones, North Korean artillery, even reports of Houthis coming to fight in the Russian winter. So it is a difficult situation for Putin. So he may be ready to have a peace of some kind. And I also think the Ukrainians may be ready as well. They will never recognize Russia's occupation of their territory, but I think they are coming to realize that they don't have the means to evict Russia militarily now.
Does anyone actually fall for that kind of stuff? Because just think, in the context of that one soundbite right there, he completely contradicts himself. He talks about Russia like they're literally on life support, like they're about to collapse at any second. But of course, Ukraine recognizes they can't actually knock them out, so they have to negotiate. I mean, if Russia was as bad as that, Ukraine would be fighting all the harder to drive them out. So those things can't coexist. But yet that's what passes for elite conversation in America today.
Yeah, you see this lack of coherence in the analysis, and it keeps going on and on. A lot of this is just really a product of propaganda that the United States, we have to face the fact that Europe, the US, the UK are some of the most propagandized societies in the world now. We're all inundated with this propaganda. What's made it even worse is the censorship of foreign media, because then we can't even read what the other media from China or Russia or some of these other countries are reporting. We can't listen to what their defense experts are claiming. We can't like measure that against our facts. So that debate doesn't happen. So what you have is this kind of inbred propaganda environment where they're talking about North Korean troops and Houthis in Ukraine. These are two items of fake news that have been completely spun into the stratosphere. And everybody, it's so funny when you listen to CNN or Fox and some of these ridiculous networks now, they all basically latch on. If there's a talking point that's floating around, everybody latches on. It just becomes a talking point memo. And you just hear every single pundit repeating it. This happens all the time. And this shows you the problem is our politicians, including Donald Trump, by the way, will get their facts and get their worldview and their foreign policy cues from Fox News or from CNN or from MSNBC, because they don't have time. And even their aides, I'm wondering, their briefers and aides are doing the same thing, or they're getting it from think tanks, and CNN's getting it from the same think tanks. So there's this kind of a circular reasoning and circular information environment in Washington where the overall quality of analysis, the overall Ray McGovern's talked about this, CIA veteran CIA analyst, the overall quality of analysis just dropping lower and lower. And so the decision making and the things that inform policy in Washington, it becomes more nonsensical, and hence the policy doesn't work. And I think there's an argument to be made there.
All you have to do is just look, let's keep it with the mainstream media about the performance and behavior on the ground. And you can see, at least I do, that it's like, wait a minute, Volker, what you're saying is just irrational. It doesn't line up with what I see even in the American press. But to your point, one of the things we hallmark on our channel here is that we do listen to both sides. We listen to the Volkers and the H.R. McMasters and some of these other people, but we also listen to the other side so that we get to make our own choice about who's right, who's wrong, based on what we can see on the ground. Toward that end, here's what the apparently very weakened Russian side is saying is their negotiating position by Vladimir Putin.
The essence of our proposal is not some kind of temporary truce or suspension of fire, as, for example, the West wants. This is not about freezing the conflict, but about its final completion. And I will say again, as soon as Kiev agrees to a similar course of events proposed today, agrees to the complete withdrawal of its troops from the DPR and LPR in the Zaporozhye and Kherson regions, and really begins this process, we are ready to begin negotiations without delaying them. I repeat, this is our principled position. Neutral, non-aligned, nuclear-free status of Ukraine, its demilitarization and denazification.
So he's been saying that literally from the outset, and that was from June 14th. Well, just a couple of days ago, Dmitry Peskov repeated again that is still their position, where he laid out the conditions that it's the 4 oblasts and then no NATO. So that continues to be the Russian position here. And then one has to say, okay, is Volker's view that of Russia falling apart, or is the view from the physical actions on the ground truth the case? Here, for example, in recently the Wall Street Journal, there was an article about how the Russians in just the past 3 months alone have fired more than 6,000 explosive drones and missiles and FAB bombs in airstrikes that have been crushing Ukraine throughout the depth of their country, 3 times higher than the previous 3 months and 4 times higher than those same months from a year ago. And then that has led on the ground to lost territory for the Ukraine side. And you can see in this chart here that the lowest point in the middle there, where it says 50 square kilometers, was taken in the month of June. And then you see all the way through the month of November in the far right-hand column, 700 square kilometers. You see this just on this dramatic increase. And so far this month, it's going on the same pace here. So everything that you can physically see on the ground means that what Russia is asking is coming from a position of strength, not weakness. And yet we just keep going down this Volker path. So we're going to run into a roadblock here pretty soon to where our desired fictitious view of how things are is going to run into a Russia when Trump comes into office. He's wanting to negotiate a settlement. But here's the thing, is that if we think that we're going to negotiate from a position of strength, again, to your point there, if Trump's people are listening to some of the mainstream stuff, he may have a higher opinion of where his negotiating and leverage are than what's really on the ground. So my question to you is, to what extent is Putin willing to negotiate with Trump on those core issues he mentioned there, i.e., will he keep it on the current line of contact? And if he doesn't get that, what is Putin's alternative?
Well, firstly, you said something that's absolutely paramount at the beginning. You said, that's Russia's exact same position from the onset of this whole crisis, of this whole conflict. They haven't changed. They've been absolutely consistent. Who's been all over the board and all over the shop is the United States, NATO, and Zelensky, completely all over the place. So they don't really have a coherent sort of approach to this. And as they're mulling around, I think what this shows is what a catastrophe that this whole project has been, and what they're trying to do now with all of these desperate tactical moves by getting the Ukrainians to hit more targets within Russia is to somehow improve their position in negotiations in a dangerous sort of situation. I think there's kind of a crossroads here. It could either go escalate out of control, or these desperate escalations you could look at as kind of maybe the Americans are trying to improve their negotiation positions in the next administration, so they're not willing to go to all-out nuclear war. But let me tell you, Russia is ready to go all the way. They've said so publicly, and there's no reason to doubt that. And this is the same position they've had during the Cold War. This is the same position during the Soviet Union times. This is the basis for all the disarmament and anti-ballistic missile treaties and so forth between the United States, its allies, and the Soviet Union. And the other thing that people in the Trump administration and the United States in general need to understand and get their head around is that Russia doesn't look at this of Biden administration, Trump administration, like you're going to get a different deal. Russia's position is going to be absolutely stone cold, consistent, right from the onset through now into the Trump negotiation. So if the Trump team is not a realist, if they haven't studied and don't understand the full spectrum of the issues with Ukraine that have happened, especially over the last 3 years, but also they need to understand the Minsk negotiations. They need to understand all of these different agreements and pacts. They need to understand NATO expansion and the United States' previous commitments and lapsed commitments and U-turns on previous promises. This is all important because if you're going to try to negotiate with Russia, they're calculating all of this stuff right back through history. That calculates their position today. So if the United States is not willing to acknowledge and really get in and understand that, they're way behind the 8 ball already. And Russia's just going to basically, if it's not a serious negotiation from the United States and they're just in there throwing their weight around, asking for things that they're not going to get, which you're already hearing noises about this from some of the foreign policy experts who clearly do not have an appreciation or really understanding, A, of what the battlefield realities are, like what you just showed on screen, but also what's happened, what's brought this situation to the current moment. You have to know that. You can't just truncate everything, every bit of context that preceded the present moment, which is what a lot of U.S. rhetoric likes to do. And by doing that, they simplify, they dumb down the picture, and you can't really have any meaningful negotiations if that's how you're going in to talk to Russia on this.
Well, and let me just kind of highlight one other challenge that the United States or specifically the Trump team is going to have. And you alluded to it just a second ago, and I want to show you a graphic demonstration of the differences between what the Trump administration is saying and what Brother Zelensky is saying. So first of all, I want to show you, here's what Trump said about his negotiating position just this past Sunday.
Should Ukraine prepare for less aid from the United States after you're sworn into office?
Yeah, probably. Sure.
You said you can end the war in 24 hours. You've even said you want to try to end it before you're sworn into office. You're actively trying to?
I am.
Have you talked to President Putin?
No, I have not.
You haven't talked to President Putin
No, I have
since
not.
you've been
You
elected?
mean, no, well, I don't want to say that, but I haven't spoken to him recently.
So you've spoken to President Putin since you've been elected?
I don't want to say that. I don't want to say anything about that because I don't want to do anything that could impede the negotiation.
Yeah. So there's Trump said, yeah, I have already talked to Putin. We are moving in a direction. This is what we're going to do. So that was Sunday. Here's Zelensky yesterday talking about what he wants to do.
Нам потрібні Тауруси, як і інші далекобійні ракети, щоб бити по необхідних військових, саме військових цілях в Росії, і саме так закінчити війну якнайшвидше. Чим менше буде російський військовий потенціал, тим швидше буде досягнутий мир.
So he's saying he wants long-range weapons to weaken Russia. After 3 years of disaster, he still has this just irrational view, and there's no kinder way to put it, that he thinks a few long-range missiles can do something. And so then he launched some. Obviously, with American participation and permission, he actually took that action there, which is completely contrary to what Trump's coming to say, says that he's going to try to do. So how do you reconcile those two things if you're Trump?
I think they're trying to create a good cop, bad cop situation. There's clearly, element of the United States deep state and establishment that want to continue escalation and want to sort of, super hyper militarize Europe going forward. And, the U.S., again, I said this, I think, on a previous program, the United States has sunk billions of dollars into new bases in Scandinavia, especially. We're talking about Denmark, Finland, Sweden, Norway, 47 new bases that are coming online just in that area. That's not even talking about Romania and the NATO expansion there, and the U.S.'s role in that. So the long-term money is going into the hyper-militarization of Europe. So that's the U.S. deep state, the defense establishment, the Democrat arm of the deep state, Obama arm, which are much more hawkish, the Clinton arm, much more hawkish against Russia. Republicans clearly are not as hawkish politically against Russia, but the same deep state, the same defense establishment that will back or be in league with Donald Trump on other issues, they're still very hawkish on Russia and Ukraine. So you've got these forces, and this is the black pill moment. The environment of Washington, it will shape the president and their policies, and as much as you want to be independent. You're dealing with a machine here, and this machine has ways of molding and shaping. The transition period is like halcyon days for any president, because you're able to do some freewheeling and talking and so forth. But once you get sworn in, and the press are on your back constantly, and then you can mobilize all of these assets to push Donald Trump. They did this in the last Trump administration. They used the Russiagate hoax to push him to be more hawkish on Russia. And Donald Trump was very hawkish in terms of sanctions, providing lethal aid to the Ukrainians, things that Obama didn't do, Trump did. And Russiagate was instrumental in that, because he had to prove that he wasn't, colluding with Putin behind the scenes. He wasn't blackmailed with compromise and all this stuff. So a lot of this, you're starting to see Ukraine is playing that role as well. They're trying to push the situation into a certain direction. Then certain people will back them in Europe, and then the press and the other leaders will say, hey, why is Donald Trump abandoning Europe on Ukraine? This is outrageous. Why is he not supporting NATO? NATO consensus is this. We saw all this during the first Trump administration. They're just going to retool this up and maybe ratchet it up to maybe a more intense level, because obviously the stakes are a lot higher now than in Trump when he was president 45. It's much higher stakes.
Let's take a look at that. That's unfortunately rational, and it lines up with a lot of the things we saw from the first Trump administration. But let's zero down on what that means in the near term here, because as you said a second ago, and I've heard from a number of other sources, that the Russian side isn't thinking there's going to be a major change from one administration to another. It's the United States, and they have said sometimes that things were worse in some regards under Trump than even under Biden prior to the outbreak of the war, of course. So the question is going to be, if the Trump team, with whatever pressures behind him, come in and say, we want a negotiated, our entry level is here, and Russia says our entry level is here, so those two things don't line up. What is Russia going to do if Trump comes in wanting to have a negotiated deal, but they're not willing to meet that minimum requirement we just played there from June?
Who holds all the cards? Russia holds all the cards. They hold all the cards on the ground, And they're increasingly so, they're going to hold the cards politically, internationally, because Russia's made it very clear they're willing to negotiate. And if that doesn't happen in any timely fashion, in any meaningful way, Russia can just walk away, Daniel, if what you said happens, that they're not meeting in the sort of entry point on negotiations. Russia will just step back and say, those are our terms. That's what the winner does in any conflict. They don't have to backpedal for the United States. But in a way, there's this kind of, I don't know, this sort of ego complex in the West that everybody must conform when the United States is ready to sit at the table. If anybody doesn't conform, they're somehow sabotaging a meaningful, well-intentioned U.S. negotiation. Russia not going to play this game that so many, you can do that with weaker countries, but you're dealing with a superpower here. And so Russia's not going to enter in negotiations in the way that, some of these ridiculous conferences they've held in Geneva over Syria with John Kerry and so forth. I mean, even the JCPOA as a international effort, that you're not going to get that type of situation here. This is a binary situation. Europe is a belligerent party. NATO is a belligerent party. The US is a belligerent party. Ukraine is, as far as Russia is concerned, is a belligerent party. So they're going to do everything to secure their national interests and their security perimeter. And that just increases the more these attacks. Now you're going to be, by the time negotiations come, they could be haggling over Odessa and Kharkiv. And the longer they muddle around, the U.S. lost the opportunity to settle this. It was in March 2022. It was 8 years before that with the Minsk Accords. I mean, that's the real reality. So there's no way around this. Russia knows that. But U.S. hasn't. People in the U.S. don't even know what the Minsk Accords were, but the deep state does. Jake Sullivan does, but the average U.S. TV pundit or analyst just brushed it off as some kind of a Putin sideshow or whatever they'll call it to just diminish it. But that had a mandate at the UN Security Council level.
It's interesting, Patrick, because when Tucker Carlson interviewed Sergei Lavrov a week or so ago, one of the more telling parts of that, I think, was when he went back even before the Minsk Accords and said, listen, if during the initial uprising in February 20, at the key moment of February 2014, when Yanukovych was still in power, he said a deal had been worked out. European leaders and negotiators had come over, and we worked out a deal to where there would be early elections in May of 2014. And he said, and we knew our side was going to lose. We knew that. We were actually going to follow the rule of law and let the elections hold themselves. But he said the other side was not willing to be patient, to wait those 5 months, and then they seized power. He said, had they done that, Crimea would likely still be in Ukraine control to this day, and
100%.
all of that went farther. But then Russia says, once you've demonstrated your willingness here, then now our willingness goes down and we take action, i.e. to annex Crimea. And then, so that has, to your point a second ago, it's pretty consistent with what Russia has done all the way through. So the idea that now then they're going to give away something that they don't have to seems pretty low.
No, they're not. They've already given in terms of attacking Russia on Russian territory, hitting long-range nuclear detection radar systems, hitting Russian bases, airfields in Russia. It's already beyond the pale. All they're doing right now is we're really all just basically drafting off the goodwill of the Russian Federation not to escalate, because they would be, in their mind anyway, and perhaps in international law. Lore, they would be in their right to retaliate to the source of the threat, because we support Israel, we support other states, we support Ukraine to do that. So, I mean, once you get into a war situation, you're into a realist Hobbesian Mearsheimer world, and one party is clearly stronger than the other, and also has a greater strategic depth, has a greater strategic resolve. And the balance of resolve on this is going to be on Russia's side. So, I mean, so you have to calculate this into the broader view of entering into any kind of dialogue.
Well, anyone who's rationally thinking has to take that into consideration. But I fear, Patrick, that the so-called elite in this country and in the West in general won't or even can't come to that conclusion, and they'll have to have it explained to them on the ground in ways that we no longer have flexibility. And I think that right now, you mentioned a second ago, on the one hand, it sounds pretty close that Trump takes, over on the 20th of next month. That sounds short in one hand, but man, that's almost an eternity to wonder what else could happen in between now and then. And right now, according to what the Russians are saying, we're waiting to find out what their next reaction is going to be. And this whole conversation could change pretty quick, depending on what happens next. And I guess we'll have to wait and see what happens with that. But you brought up something about the Middle East, because obviously that Russia is also connected with what's going on there as well. And I want to shift gears a little bit there and take a look at what's been happening, because obviously it's been a momentous profound shift in the Middle East, bigger probably in decades, with the alarming fall of the Assad regime and the rise of this HTS group, or at least the emergence on the public scene of the HTS. And I want to show a little clip of somebody on MSNBC who is analyzing who the leader of HTS is, and then I want to get your views on the backside.
He was put on the terrorist list in 2013. Prior to that, he was a young man who, after the U.S. invasion of Iraq, decided to go up and fight the Americans. And after not so long, he was put into an American prison camp that worked as something like a jihadi university. When he got out, he went to Baghdadi, the head of ISIS, and said, look, I want to fight in Syria. And he got Baghdadi to give him $60,000 to go across the border with 6 men and begin to build an al-Qaeda faction in northern Syria. I met him in 2021. He was already in the process of rebranding himself. He had broken with al-Qaeda. He had broken with Baghdadi. In fact, when I was there, he was fighting. He was having skirmishes with their cells that were around Idlib province.
So I want to focus on that part first, that he was talking about at the end of the clip there, that Jelani, especially on that CNN interview where he was trying to come across as this really nice Western view, that he seems really reasonable, et cetera. He's rebranded himself. He's no longer this old guy. And so now we just want to govern. How do you see it?
This is just completely outrageous. This whole the way this has been spun up in the aftermath of the media, it's incredible. Now I've been covering the Syrian conflict since day one, even before day one, technically, and also I've spent time on the ground even during the war there, in some of these areas, the battle zone or ex-battle zones. I was fortunate enough to be able to survey the damage in East Aleppo and Palmyra. And Homs and places like this, as well as around Damascus. So, and what you're seeing here is there's no debate. This is HTS is an absolute rebrand of Al Qaeda in Syria, Jabhat al-Nusra, ISIS are all synonymous, and the Free Syrian Army, all synonymous. The Syrian National Army, the same thing. Turkey's little construct that they built out of the Free Syrian Army.
Well, let me ask you a question, because you probably know, because I've heard that he had these run-ins with Al Qaeda and run-ins with ISIS, and he was going against them. Was his disagreement over fundamentals, like what the group should be going after, or was there something else?
I really don't believe a lot of the cover stories in the media around someone like this. If you study Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi and you look at al-Jalani, it's not his real name, by the way. I think his real name was just released. That's another story. But yeah. I mean, you could make the argument that in some degree, and this might have sounded conspiratorial 10 years ago, but that he was sheep dipped out of Camp Bucca. And that the establishment of an Al Qaeda in Syria branch is not an organic thing. There are external powers that are shaping these battlefields, like the United States, like Turkey, NATO ostensibly, and Israel as well as Gulf states. Okay, they poured tons of resources and money into crushing Syria, to destabilize it, to overthrow the Assad government, the Syrian state, since 2011. This is proven beyond any doubt. So why wouldn't they be involved in some of these terrorist factions that have sprung up in Syria and Iraq and places like this, that magically don't ever attack Israel, but are sort of hell-bent on overthrowing the government there? And I think this is just a perfect example of it. This is a foreign-backed terrorist army armed by foreign powers, paid for by foreign powers, with foreign fighters dispatched in to basically overrun the country of Syria. And they didn't just overthrow the Assad regime. They collapsed the Syrian state. They don't have an economy right now. Then it's going to be, what you're looking at here is they're celebrating for the next few days, and everybody's kind of high on this kind of Arab Spring, hopium, short-term fix, dopamine rush. But it's the black flag is flying over Damascus. This is ISIS. This is Al Qaeda. It's the same ideology. It's the same fighters. And this is not going to be a pluralistic democratic society. What is going to happen, Daniel, I predict, and I'm sad to say this, but it's going to, the country and the region is going to descend into a violent civil war. There's going to be a bloodbath in Syria. That's, by all accounts, that's what looks like is shaping up. And that precedes the breakup of Syria. The breakup of Syria. It's already balkanized. The United States, Kurdish control and occupation of a large part of the northeast of Syria, 25% of the landmass. The U.S. is going to retrench, probably increase their footprint there now under a Trump administration. I doubt they're going to be, exfiltrating from really hard strategic positions there. Israel certainly doesn't want the United States to leave, because that's going to cut a nice path to Iraqi Kurdistan right up to the Iranian border. And so you're going to see the focus shift towards Iran. That's why this is a monumentous event that we're seeing. This is right, 6-day war, Yom Kippur. This is equally as significant historically. Israel's already taking Syrian territory, has obliterated the Syrian military, all of their infrastructure, their government intelligence buildings, bureaucracies have been all hit in airstrikes. This is the largest amount of Israeli airstrikes in a day in the history of the country, I think. I think they did 250 in 24 hours or something like that.
I think it's up to around 400 in the 48 hours, just obliterating everything. And I want to jump on something you said there about the Iran factor, because there are a lot in the United States, and this is probably part and parcel to what you were talking about a while ago in terms of what the, this elite group of cabal or whatever it is wanted to do in Russia. They also have their sights on some stuff in the Middle East, i.e. on Iran. And here was, unfortunately, one of my former commanders, H.R. McMaster, talking about what a great opportunity we have before us today.
Has the opportunity to challenge that conventional wisdom and put into place some really major shifts in U.S. foreign policy, I think especially in the Middle East at this moment.
What do you think happens there? Because I do have this from him. He has issued a warning on Trump on Truth Social with a post there. He says, if the hostages aren't released prior to January 20th, 2025, the date I proudly assume office as president of the United States, there will be, quote, all hell to pay in the Middle East. He says he wants those hostages home before he is sworn in. How do you think a policy shift happens with him in that situation?
Okay, well, first of all, I love it because there's been so much talk about, well, we need to cease fire in Gaza. We need, no, actually, until Hamas is destroyed, in my belief, you can't have any better life for the Palestinians, and certainly you have to get the hostages back. So I would like to see us working more actively with the Israelis and others to get the hostages back, but also to make Iran pay the price for their terrorist and proxy network across the region. There's a huge opportunity at this moment.
A huge opportunity at this moment. Finally, we can go and kill Iran with another war.
I don't know where to start. There are so many there's so many tropes and deceptions in everything that he said there. It'll take all day to unpack it. I mean, what hell to pay? Are the Palestinians gonna feel from incoming Trump administration? What's he gonna do? Bomb Gaza? Israel's already done that. It's a parking lot. Okay, they can't suffer anymore. There's an ongoing genocide. I'm sorry to use the G word for some people that don't recognize still that that's happened, but it is happening. And so they're not going to make the Palestinians suffer any more than they already are, and they're not going to eliminate Hamas by pushing that, maybe if the plan is what McMaster's talking about is pushing the Romanian Palestinian population into the Sinai desert and then emptying out the West Bank into Jordan, maybe, okay, that kind of makes sense from that sort of twisted view of the situation. But, what he wants, what McMaster wants is to expand the U.S. war machine in the Middle East, to re-expand, because the United States has been pulling back in recent years. They've been trying to execute a policy of offshore balancing since the Iraq War, since the Bush administration. And what it's done is just created a cauldron of constant conflicts in the Middle East. And even the Abraham Accords, I'll throw in there as well. This did a lot to create the October 7th situation as well. So this is what these people want. This is what they, and he's talking about Iran's terror proxies. The United States has backed an Al-Qaeda takeover of the Syrian Arab Republic. This was the last pluralistic, secular Arab state in the area. I mean, Iraq as well, but put Iraq off to the side. Lebanon as well, but it's been there as a sort of standard bearer for a secular Arab nation state. Whether you like Bashar al-Assad and his father or not, that's a reality. The black flag is flying over Aleppo and Damascus. The United States has backed, materially supported, and Turkey and Israel and Qatar and other Gulf allies have materially supported an Al-Qaeda, a radical Islamist takeover of a country like Syria, the birthplace of Christianity in the world. And you may not be able to ever walk down the streets of the old city of Damascus and visit the chapel of St. Paul, which I've done, or go to an Aramaic community like Malula, or to walk the road to Damascus, as Saul of Tarsus did. You might not be. There were 8 million tourists going there before hostilities broke out in 2011, and we have been. It's in our policy papers. You can trace the U.S. policy to decapitate the leadership of Syria. You can trace it all the way back 50 years, but it becomes formal policy in the 1990s, and it becomes formal Israeli policy coalescing with U.S. policy from Richard Pearl and the neocons in the 90s who codified that in the Clean Break document, and that became that was the beginnings of everything that we saw running up to 2011. The United States, and what McMaster and all these other war hawks will never say, is the United States have put a vice grip of sanctions on Syria, strangled the country from 2011, put an embargo on it, are occupying their oil fields, occupying their gas, their wheat, their agriculture, their power, their hydroelectricity, fresh water. They've stolen all of that with their Kurdish proxies, while simultaneously strangling Syria economically to create maximum pressure, as Mike Pompeo puts it, to force the people to rise up and overthrow Assad. Well, the people didn't rise up. It came from outside of Syria. This was a Turkish, NATO, Gulf, Israeli, US-backed, foreign, radical Islamic terrorist army that has overrun a country that will now, the state of Syria is effectively dead right now. Israel took out their defense, so it's not a sovereign country anymore. It is now going to be totally reliant on its foreign managers, which will be divided between Turkey, the United States, Israel, and then it will be funded. The Gulf will be injecting money in there to try to get an ROI, like a pipeline through there, something like that with Qatar. But that's the reality. There's no sovereignty there. Executions on the street and reprisal killings are happening daily now in Syria. That's not a democracy.
Yeah, and that's you don't ever hear that on the mainstream media, or at least I haven't heard that, but I certainly see it in a lot of places on social media. And I want to play one last clip here, which is it's really embarrassing to see. I've had John Kirby on clips of him on here on our show many times, and a lot of things he says doesn't make sense, or he's just giving a mouthpiece to what the administration is doing. This one, I think, is much more illustrative of some of the more dangerous aspects that I think that you can see right away. And in fact, I'm not even going to set this up. I'm going to let you watch it fresh. Check this out.
John, do we have confirmation of these attacks that Israel has been waging on Syria? Yeah. It says that it has virtually destroyed Syria's navy. Is that so?
I will let the Israelis speak for their operations and the results of those operations. They, of course, have a right to defend themselves, and we recognize that they want to properly assess the threat coming from Syria over that Golan Heights or near the Golan Heights.
They have a right to defend themselves, the Israeli did. All those 400 airstrikes, apparently there was a real risk. I mean, what do you make of that?
It's hard to take someone like John Kirby seriously. He's just been doing the same sort of ventriloquist propaganda act now for I don't know how many years in his different spokespersons positions with the Pentagon, the State Department. It's kind of ridiculous at this point. Israel taking other countries' sovereign territory, formally annexing it, and also, Lebanese territory they're occupying. They've stolen a good chunk of Syrian territory. That's not defending yourself. But that goes to show you that that's what was standing in the way with the previous Syrian government and the Syrian state. They were preventing Israel from doing it because Israel knew that they would defend their position and strike back, that they had viable air defenses, that Israel could take losses if they tried to do what they've just done over the last 72 or 4 or 5 days, that there would be a price to pay. Once you've removed the government, once you've allowed ISIS and Al-Qaeda to come and overrun the country, and then basically at that point you can do whatever you want to Syria. So it won't function as a state. John Kirby, there's a whole bunch of sort of tropes that he's interwoven into that are kind of ridiculous on their face, and it makes me wonder. I don't know how these people, none of these people have spent any time on the ground in the Middle East, and the green zone doesn't count, I'm afraid. But I'm talking about in any of these countries, to know what absolute hell on earth U.S. policy and U.S.'s allied policies have created for people in that country. But we tell ourselves that that's all for the greater good, because there's nothing worse in the world than Bashar al-Assad. Assad didn't destroy the economy in Syria. As much as we want to make that the blame and say he deserved sanctions, he deserved to have his for the United States to illegally occupy 25% of Syrian territory since 2017. He deserved all that. And deserved to have an Al-Qaeda Islamic State of Idlib forming within his country, backed by Turkey and NATO. He deserved that because he's an evil dictator. I mean, this is just the ridiculous kind of framing that we've seen with Saddam Hussein, we've seen with Muammar Gaddafi. So you have, 1 or 2 failed states there. This will be a failed state, Daniel. This is going to be a disaster of epic proportions. Do you realize you practically have an ISIS caliphate full on Europe's border? There's unlimited amount of things that can go wrong here, and that could draw us in. And this is what it's really about, Daniel. Is you have Donald Trump coming in making these hawkish peacenik sort of sounding overtures about conflict. But when it comes to the Middle East, that might be true with Russia, and it might happen. But with the Middle East, Donald Trump will be pushed into a position where he will be compelled to escalate because of a threat from ISIS or something like this. This is where things are headed. And it's a reestablishment of U.S. position. Because what does Israel want? What the Trump administration wants in the Middle East is determined by what Israel wants, and Israel wants a bigger U.S. presence.
Yeah, and that's already being set up. In fact, I don't know, Gary, if you have it handy about the Jake Sullivan. Is that handy? I'm looking at you down there. It doesn't matter. We played it before, where Jake Sullivan came out a couple of days ago and was asked about our presence in Syria.
We have a presence both in Iraq and in Syria. That presence in Syria is there to work hand in hand with local partners to continue to suppress the threat that ISIS has posed going back many years now. And we've had significant progress in that fight just even in the last few months. Major players taken off the battlefield, large-scale degradation of those ISIS forces. But of course, an event like this happens, and ISIS immediately looks to take advantage, and we have seen reports.
Yeah, that's enough on that, Gary. That you see, he is absolutely laying the groundwork for the Trump administration. You can't get those troops out of Syria. You've got to pit. My God, ISIS. They just keep waving that banner up there, because it scares people, almost like communists used to in the last century in our country here. And I worry a lot about that the McMasters and the Sullivans and all these other people are just trying to maneuver Trump into where when he comes in, he's going to have to go after Iran, because now also the IAEA came out a few days back and says that Iran is now close to weapons grade. They're building their stockpile. It'll take this much to go. And as I had Ambassador Chaz Freeman on the show a few days ago, he said basically we're doing everything in our power to compel Iran to conclude that their only means of self-defense is to go nuclear, which I think will then be used as a casus belli, that we have to go to war.
What all these military experts and commanders and stuff like that, and think tankers, what they'll never tell you is that in Syria, ISIS was flushed out, was obliterated in reality by the Russian Air Force, the Syrian Arab Army, Hezbollah, Iranian Quds forces, and also some Hashd al-Shabi PMUs that came over from Iraq. In the areas controlled by the Syrian government, ISIS doesn't exist. ISIS has been allowed to exist in the areas that the United States has been custodially managing since 2017. And is that a coincidence? ISIS was flushed out of Iraq because of the PMUs, because of the Shiite militia, because of the Hashd al-Shabi, the Iraqi Islamic resistance, and so forth. They mobilized. There was a fatwa when ISIS came on the scene in July 2014, and all of these people, they created these people's mobilization units, 120, 150,000 strong collectively. They did all the ground fighting with Iranian special forces, with Qasem Soleimani, with Abu Mahdi al-Mohandes, who was in the car with Soleimani when he was killed, who was also killed in that decapitation. So they defeated ISIS on the ground. Those were Yazidi militias, Christian militias, Sunni militias in Iraq, not just all Shiite, Fali Kurdish militias as well. It was a total broad-based effort in Iraqi society to deal with ISIS because the United States wasn't doing it. The United States carpet bombed Mosul and Raqqa and would do a lot of air sorties and push ISIS around. They would move ISIS around, but they couldn't eliminate ISIS. That work was done on the ground by the people that, McMaster, like Mike Pompeo, called terrorists. Iranian special forces, Hashid. They proscribed all of these organizations as terrorists because they were fighting ISIS. So, I mean, anybody who fights ISIS, who gets in the way of this key instrument, this Swiss Army knife that you can just unleash anywhere in the Middle East, anybody who gets in the way of this is going to be labeled as a terrorist group or an Iranian proxy. Hezbollah did more on people in Syria, how many lives Hezbollah saved by holding back ISIS and defeating al-Nusra in a lot of these areas. And all of that for all the Syrians who lived in relative peace since the Astana agreement, the ceasefire agreement, was inked in 2017 and 18. All of that was lost. All of that is lost because what's coming now is basically a free-for-all in Syria and Iraq. There's nothing to stop the black flag from going for Mosul again, just over the border. And will the U.S. stand in the way of that? Will they stop them from marching to Palmyra through the desert, 250 miles? Any satellite could see. No, they will march to Palmyra. They'll march wherever they darn well want, and then we'll react and say that we're dealing with the problem. And we need more Air Force. We need more money. We need to increase the defense budget to increase our presence. And also back in Iraq, because the U.S. has been pushed out of Iraq because it's politically become very untenable. Iraqi parliament has asked them to leave twice. The U.S. said, no, we're not leaving. So they need an excuse. Donald Trump would be the ideal person to sell the battle against ISIS 2.0 and the re-escalation in the Middle East. Donald Trump would be the perfect U.S. president to sell this. They will make him into a war hawk one way or another.
And it's funny because one of the persons who can help guard against that is Tulsi Gabbard. And he is placed in one of the most key positions, the Director of National Intelligence, which has just made the neocon group has just gone on fire. Trying to do everything they can to sabotage her more than any other nominee. And that even includes Gates. And so the Wall Street Journal opinion section from the editorial board, not even just somebody, but the editorial board just went crazy after her this morning, which I tweeted about, kind of exposing it. But in the last few minutes we have here, I wonder if you can talk about what this tells you about the state of play, that they want to make certain that somebody of Tulsi Gabbard's qualifications is not given Trump the intelligence information he needs.
Well, you can look at this two ways. I mean, you could look at it that they're trying to take her out of the running for this position. I mean, by sort of smearing her and whatnot. But this could also be the neocons pushing Tulsi Gabbard, like they pushed Trump and others that might have more, somewhat moderate views on certain conflict zones and so forth in policy. But she's changed her position a lot. She's much more, while she's more dovish with regards to Ukraine and Russia, like many are. Robert F. Kennedy and some of the people in the Trump camp have been very vocal about that. Tulsi Gabbard has become extremely hawkish against Iran and very pro-Israel. And while she was one of the people, ironically, that was saying that the dirty war on Syria was a huge mistake while she was a congresswoman, she traveled with Dennis Kucinich to Syria. She did that, which I think was a very honorable trip to try to find out what was really going on the ground. She did basically done a U-turn, and she really, all of her Middle Eastern positions are totally in line with what Israel and what the Israeli lobby are advocating for. And she's also become very Sunni versus Shiite, and radical Islam, putting the real focus on that. So as DNI, she doesn't really have much power, although she curates intelligence that's given to her by John Radcliffe and other agencies. So I can see that. But at the end of the day, the DNI, it can't really take an independent direction. It's really going to be, she's going to be presenting intelligence coming from the different intelligence agencies. But I think the establishment consensus, that's what really matters. And they will most certainly get the Michael Flynn treatment if a DNI goes away from the establishment consensus. You saw what happened.
Yeah. And
yeah,
the thing that really upset me the most, or alarmed me, maybe not upset me, just alarmed me, is the and you've talked about this in regards to several other things already in this show, is that they changed the historical narrative to be a fictitious one that didn't actually exist, and said that, anyone who's arguing against, like what the McMasters are saying and several of these, all these other people that we're talking about here about, we have to fight, we have to do this, we have to do that. They're just demonizing anyone who says anything besides that. And I'm sure that includes you and I, and several others that are like us that tell the truth. But that's just a part of the price, I guess, we have to pay. But I can assure you, we're going to keep telling the truth here and exposing this kind of nonsense. And what worries me the most, Patrick, and I know we're almost out of time here, is that this stuff can work for a long time. But at some point, when these people get enough power and they succeed at getting the wars they want, we may find ourselves one day in a very, very bad situation. And the price that we could all pay could be extraordinary.
Sure. I mean, when we're talking about any of these cabinet picks, Tulsi Gabbard, anybody coming in the Trump team, the real black pill to swallow here is that the Washington machine will turn you into a yes man or a yes woman in some of these positions, even if you maybe weren't so much that going into the job. And that's the big challenge, is will we get leadership and executive that is truly independent of this Washington blob, this foreign policy blob that, let's face it, whether it's the Obama wing of the deep state or whether it's the neocon wing, i.e. and the Israeli lobby wing, they both have more or less the same long-term goals, but it's just the arguments over how they're going to get there, what path they're going to take. But you see this overwhelming continuity. It would take a very extraordinary executive and extraordinary cabinet to change that. The question is, will they do that? Because we're not even talking about the China conversation, and that's seen as an existential challenge to American power going forward into the 21st century.
Yeah.
So that becomes another thing. And Syria is very connected to China. With the Middle East is absolutely, Iran so connected to China because of the Belt and Road Initiative, and because of the BRICS.
Yeah,
initiative. So all these things are absolutely connected, especially Syria, by the way, because the cauldron that could explode right now because of what we've seen, the collapse of the Syrian government and society and the state, what's coming next could have such a destabilizing effect on the entire region. And even if we don't get World War III as people imagine it in their worst nightmares, what you can get is incredible disruption economically, and hyperinflation and energy crises, and all these things could happen as a result. So we have to go into this next term eyes wide open on this.
We do, and we're going to continue. I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it right there. I've just been alerted that I'm actually late for another engagement. I have to go on somebody else's show. I apologize for the brief exit here, but I appreciate you coming on, and we'll have you back on and talk about this China stuff, because that's another whole episode we need to talk about. Thank you for coming on today. Thank you guys for being on with us. Be sure and like and subscribe if you haven't already, and we'll see you on the next episode of Daniel Davis Deep Dive.